It all started when I got a court summons that didn't feel right. An official-looking envelope slid under my front door in the middle of the night, stamped with the HOA seal but with no return address and the judge's name spelled wrong. I'm not stupid. I've lived in this community long enough to know HOA President Karen Whitmore loves playing power games. A court-level fraud? That was new. And when I showed that paper to a real clerk the next morning, their eyebrows shot up, and they confirmed my suspicion. It was a forgery. That's when I knew something much bigger was going on, something that needed to be exposed. I was going to be the one to do it. You're watching Sham Stories? Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the moment. This HOA drama explodes in court. For months, Karen had made my life miserable. Started with bogus violation notices for leaving my trash bins out 15 minutes past pickup, then escalated 2 threats of fines over my mailbox being 2 inches too tall. At first I brushed it off like most people, just an overzealous HOA president with too much time on her hands. But then she started showing up unannounced, taking photos of my family, warning my wife that we were on notice, and even whispering rumors to neighbors that we were running some kind of illegal operation out of our garage because my son had built a few PCs for his friends. She was spiraling into obsession, but until I saw that forged summons, I didn't realize she had crossed into criminal territory. The document claimed I was being sued by the HOA for failure to comply with community standards and was ordered to appear in court within 5 days. No case number, no court seal, and the font on the signature line didn't match anything official. But the real kicker? It was dated 3 weeks earlier. That told me Karen hadn't just fabricated the document sheet, tried to corner me with it too late to respond legally, hoping I'd panic or default, and she could push for a property lien. That's when I reached out to my friend Lisa, a paralegal, who ran the document through several authentication checks. She confirmed it. Fake headers, misaligned formatting, a judge's name who'd been retired for 5 years and a non-existent docket number. It wasn't just an idle threat. It was a calculated legal ambush designed to force me out of my home. Lisa urged me to report it, so we went to the county court directly. The clerk reviewed it, called in a supervisor, and before I knew it, we were sitting in a back room with 2 state investigators from the Attorney General's office. Apparently, I wasn't the first person to raise concerns about HOA overreach in our neighborhood, but I was the first to bring forged legal documents. Karen had finally crossed a line that triggered the state's interest. The investigators were especially interested in how the summons was delivered. I had camera footage from my doorbell system showing a shadowy figure clearly. Karen bending over and slipping the envelope under my door just after 2 a.m., wearing a hoodie and gloves. That footage, paired with Lisa's verification, was enough for them to request a court hearing on the forgery matter. They didn't tell me at first. I later found out they'd obtained a quiet warrant to seize Karen's computer and office files. Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down. At the next HOA meeting, she stood up in front of 50 homeowners and declared that I was in legal jeopardy, waving around more papers that she claimed were court filings. But when someone asked to see them, she refused, saying they were confidential. That meeting was the last straw for a lot of people. Neighbors who'd once ignored her antics were now whispering about her abuse of power. I started receiving anonymous notes from other residents. Some had been fined thousands for made-up violations. Others were threatened with foreclosure over landscaping. One woman, an elderly widow named Eileen, wrote that Karen had changed the HOA bylaws without a vote and was now charging a monthly administrative fee on top of regular dues. It was a racket, and now it had a face. The state moved fast. Within 10 days of my report, I received a court summons this time. Real one, stamped and filed asking me to testify in a fraud hearing. Karen was being investigated for document forgery, abuse of position, and possibly wire fraud if she'd used digital means to create the false paperwork. I showed up to court in a plain suit, holding my folder of evidence and knowing I was walking into a storm. Karen, on the other hand, arrived dressed like she was going to a charity gala, smug as ever. Flanked by a private attorney who looked more annoyed than confident. She still didn't seem to understand the gravity of what she'd done, or maybe she thought she was untouchable. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Honorable Deborah Laskin, took the bench with little fanfare. She flipped through the documents, for all of 3 minutes before looking directly at Karen and asking, "Did you file these with the court?" Karen hesitated, then said yes. The judge's eyes narrowed. "You're aware these are not real filings, correct?" Karen stammered. They were prepared by legal counsel, but before she could finish, Judge Laskin raised her hand. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell the truth. Did you submit these documents to Mr. Fisher under the pretense that they were official court summons?" Karen looked at her attorney, who just sighed, as Karen mumbled. The room fell into silence. Then the judge leaned forward and said, "Bailiff, take her into custody. This court finds probable cause for felony document forgery and attempted fraud." The gasp that rippled through the room was like something out of a movie. Karen was handcuffed on the spot, still wearing her fake pearl necklace and HOA pin. Her eyes darted to me, not in anger, but in disbelief, as if she never thought I'd fight back, let alone win. That moment was vindication, but it was only the beginning, because once Karen was in custody, the real investigation into the HOA's practices began. Want to see how deep this conspiracy went and how many others she tried to destroy? When the court date finally arrived, the courthouse was packed not just with legal officials and attorneys, but with residents of Pine Meadows and journalists from local and national outlets who had followed the case closely. I sat in the second row, just behind the prosecution, while my wife sat beside me, clutching my hand tightly, her knuckles pale. Karen was brought in wearing a charcoal gray business suit that did nothing to hide the orange jumpsuit peeking from beneath. Her expression was a strange mix of defiance and fear. She scanned the courtroom like she was still in control. But when her eyes landed on me, her face twitched and she immediately looked away. The judge presiding over the hearing, Honorable Marlene Vickers, had a reputation for being no-nonsense and brutally fair. As court came into session, the prosecution laid out their case methodically. The forged court summons Karen had created, bearing a falsified judge's signature and fraudulent court seal, was presented as the centerpiece of her criminal activity. But what followed next shocked the entire room. The forensic investigators had discovered that Karen had also faked entire sets of meeting minutes, created backdated financial documents, and even fabricated a resignation letter from a former board member who had mysteriously moved away just before Karen's rise to president. According to the state forensic accountant who took the stand, over $180,000 had been siphoned into a company called Pine Solutions LLC, which was revealed to be a dummy corporation registered in Karen's maiden name, Gregory Whitmore. Her husband had tried to deny involvement, but the financial trail made his complicity clear. The judge allowed all of it into evidence. Karen's lawyer, a young but clearly nervous man named Blake Raymond, attempted to argue that Karen was acting in good faith and had simply been overwhelmed by her responsibilities. He tried to frame the forgeries as administrative shortcuts to keep the community running smoothly. But Judge Vickers wasn't buying it. She interrupted his arguments twice, asking pointed questions that made it obvious she wasn't impressed by the defense's strategy. And then came the moment that changed everything. A woman named Donna Bell was called as a surprise witness. No one had seen her enter the courtroom earlier. She had been escorted through the back to avoid attention. Donna had once been Karen's closest friend and former HOA vice president before she vanished from the community under suspicious circumstances 2 years ago. Her sudden appearance sent murmurs through the gallery. When she took the stand, she revealed that Karen had blackmailed her into leaving her position by threatening to leak confidential family medical records that had somehow been accessed through HOA insurance claims. Donna provided emails, voicemails, and even a notarized affidavit she had prepared in secret in case anything happened to her. The affidavit outlined how Karen had deliberately orchestrated financial schemes, including fake fines, fraudulent liens, and falsified repair invoices. One of the most damning revelations was that Karen had maintained a private Google spreadsheet labeled Leverage, which listed over 30 community members along with compromising information about their finances, marriages, or employment. The courtroom was stunned. Several spectators gasped audibly, and one woman began to cry quietly in the back. Donna finished her testimony by stating Karen believed she was untouchable. She told me once that rules are for people without leverage. I stayed silent because I was afraid. But today, I'm not. The prosecution rested shortly after, and Judge Vickers took a brief recess before issuing her preliminary ruling. When court resumed, the judge's tone was steely. She said that based on the evidence and testimony provided, there was more than sufficient cause to bind Karen over for trial on all charges, including forgery, fraud, witness intimidation, and conspiracy. She then turned to Karen directly and added, "Your behavior reflects not only a betrayal of the community that entrusted you with leadership, but a calculated pattern of abuse enabled by deception and fear." Karen sat frozen, her jaw tight, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Her lawyer tried to request bail, but the judge denied it, citing the risk of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. She would remain in custody. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. I declined interviews, but Donna stood bravely before the crowd and delivered a powerful statement about accountability, truth, and healing. She was trembling, but her voice was clear. That evening, our neighborhood held an impromptu community gathering at the local park. For the first time, people brought lawn chairs, shared food, and talked freely without fear of reprisal. Parents let their kids play. Dogs ran off leash. Music played softly from a nearby speaker. It was surreal. The HOA, once a shadowy force lurking in every corner of our lives, was suddenly powerless. Marcia Allen, the court-appointed administrator, attended as well. She gave a brief update, announcing that all pending fines had been suspended and that a complete financial review was underway. She also revealed that several victims of Karen's forged liens would be reimbursed once the recovery process began. Then she opened the floor for volunteers to help draft a new HOA charter. Hands shot up everywhere. Over the next few days, the work began in earnest. Committees formed, bylaws were rewritten, and residents were invited to vote on every item. Donna Bell was nominated to help lead the new Ethics Oversight Committee, and though she was hesitant, she accepted. Her courage had lit the path forward. Meanwhile, I received an anonymous package in my mailbox, no return address. But inside was a USB drive and a short note. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Hey, this is everything. The drive contained folders of internal emails, private chat logs, and even audio recordings of Karen discussing HOA members like a mafia boss plotting leverage points. It was the final nail in the coffin. Turned it over to investigators immediately. And when they verified its authenticity, additional charges were filed. With mounting evidence and widespread community support, the prosecution moved quickly. A few weeks later, Gregory Whitmore was arrested at his office for his role in the scheme. With both of them now facing trial, the tide had officially turned. Even Karen's most loyal followers began backing away. The conspiracy theories dried up, the flyers stopped, and Pine Meadows felt for the first time in years safe. But the road to healing wasn't just about punishment. It was about rebuilding trust, learning from the past, and reclaiming our neighborhood's identity. And just when we thought the revelations were over, something even more explosive surfaced hidden within one of the emails from the anonymous USB drive. It hinted at a powerful external player, someone outside our community who had quietly funded Karen's rise and may have been using HOA boards across the state to manipulate property values, political influence, and real estate takeovers. We uncovered next would pull this local scandal onto the national stage and make us realize Karen was only one piece of a much larger, more dangerous puzzle. Karen's arrest sent shockwaves through the entire community, and within hours of her being let out of that courtroom in handcuffs, the news had already spread like wildfire across the Pine Meadows neighborhood. By sunset that same day, someone had posted a photo of her being arrested on the community Facebook group, and the comment section exploded with stunned reactions. People who had once feared her were suddenly emboldened, sharing stories of bullying, intimidation, and legal threats they had endured in silence for years. One man commented that Karen had once sent him a $3,000 fine for painting his fence off-white instead of eggshell. And another woman mentioned she had been threatened with foreclosure after refusing to allow HOA inspectors into her backyard. As the voices piled up, it became clear that Karen's reign of control wasn't just overreaching, it had been an organized, methodical abuse of power stretching back years. I hadn't expected to become the neighborhood's whistleblower, but the weight of everyone's stories pulled me deeper into the fight than I'd ever imagined. I was approached by a local investigative reporter named Dana Fields, who'd seen the court docket and wanted to cover Karen's arrest. She asked to interview me, but I hesitated. I wasn't interested in fame or attention, I just wanted the abuse to stop. But when Dana told me she'd already uncovered that Karen had been involved in similar HOA conflicts in 2 previous neighborhoods where she had also served as president, I realized this wasn't a one-off case, it was a pattern. Karen had left behind wreckage in 2 other communities, resigning just before being removed or investigated, always escaping consequences. This time, however, her arrogance had pushed her too far, with the state involved in a pending felony charge. It was clear she wouldn't be walking away unscathed. Meanwhile, the court authorized a forensic audit of Pine Meadows' HOA financial records. When the news broke, our treasurer resigned the same day, and rumors swirled that several board members were lawyering up. The state assigned a temporary court-appointed administrator to oversee the HOA until further notice. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood began to breathe. But not everyone was celebrating. Karen's supporters, though fewer than I had feared, began spreading rumors that I had set her up, that I was trying to destroy the HOA to avoid paying my dues, or that I had doctored the forged document myself. It was laughable, but damaging. I received a threatening note in my mailbox, and someone slashed my car's tires overnight. I reported everything to the authorities, who began monitoring my property, but it was a chilling reminder that Karen's influence still lingered. At one point, I saw her husband, Gregory Whitmore, standing across the street from my house, just staring. He didn't say anything, didn't approach, just stood with his hands in his pockets, watching. Police and he left before they arrived, but it was clear the intimidation tactics weren't over. Then, about a week after Karen's arrest, I received an envelope, this time with a return address and postmark from a law firm representing Pine Meadows HOA. Inside was a cease and desist letter, claiming I was publicly defaming the HOA and warning me to stop disseminating unverified allegations. I sent it straight to my attorney, who laughed out loud before drafting a reply that not only rebutted the claims, but warned them that continued legal threats could be seen as witness intimidation, given the ongoing investigation. The letter stopped any further action, and I never heard from that firm again. Meanwhile, the court-appointed administrator, a no-nonsense woman named Marcia Allen, began holding town halls in the community clubhouse. For the first time in years, homeowners were encouraged to speak freely without fear of retaliation. Stories poured out: misused funds, fraudulent fines, manipulated elections, even threats of violence. Marcia promised transparency and began publishing financial records online, something Karen had refused to do. It quickly became evident that the HOA had been running a budget surplus for 3 years. But dues had mysteriously increased each year, and consulting fees had been paid to a shell company that no one could trace. The name on the shell, company's registration, Gregory Whitmore. That revelation cracked the case wide open. Gregory was now under investigation too, and the Whitmore household had become a focal point for state auditors. Subpoenas were issued, and neighbors reported seeing law enforcement vehicles parked outside their house for days at a time. I didn't relish their downfall. I just wanted justice, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't satisfying to see the people who had made so many lives miserable finally being held accountable. During all this, Dana, the reporter, kept following the story. Her feature ran on local news and was picked up by national media within days. Suddenly, HOA abuse was trending, and Karen's photo was everywhere: headlines calling her the queen of suburban fraud and the HOA tyrant who finally got caught. My role as the first whistleblower earned me both praise and unwanted attention, and my family struggled with the sudden spotlight. My wife began working from home to avoid reporters, and we had to turn down several interview requests. We weren't interested in being media darlings. We just wanted a safe, fair community. But despite the chaos, something incredible started happening. Neighbors began stepping up to rebuild. People who'd never attended meetings before volunteered for committees, helped elderly residents fix violations Karen had levied unfairly, and even started a petition to create a new HOA charter that would include strict accountability rules and public elections with term limits. For the first time since we moved to Pine Meadows, it felt like a real community, not a kingdom ruled by fear. Karen's court hearings were scheduled to begin in full the following month, and the state attorney hinted there might be additional charges once the financial audit was complete. With Gregory's company tied to over $150,000 in consulting fees, they were looking into conspiracy and tax evasion as well. But Karen hadn't remained silent. From jail, she began sending letters to supporters, handwritten and rambling, claiming she was the victim of a deep conspiracy and that I had been planted in the community to destroy it. She accused me of being a federal agent, of falsifying evidence, and even of forging her signature on the documents she was arrested for. It was nonsense, but it revealed how detached she'd become from reality. The most disturbing part was that a few of her letters had been shared online by her allies, and they were gaining traction in fringe HOA forums filled with paranoid conspiracy theories about government control and property rights. One evening, my front door camera caught a man placing a flyer on my door, and it was Karen's face with the words, "Free Karen and Truth Will Win." I turned the footage over to police, who identified the man as a known HOA activist from another county. It was surreal watching this turn into a cult-like crusade, but I didn't back down. I documented everything, kept in touch with Marcia and the investigators, and stayed focused on helping the community rebuild. There were still risks, still occasional threats, but every time someone knocked on my door to say thank you, it reminded me why I started all this. And now, with the court date approaching and the audit almost finished, I could feel the momentum shifting completely. The neighborhood had woken up, the courts were listening, and Karen, she was about to face the consequences of years of corruption, fraud, and abuse. But what came next would shock even me, and it involved a secret she'd kept buried for years. One that not even her closest allies knew about. When it came out in court, it wouldn't just destroy her, it would change everything about how HOA power is allowed to function in this country. The next morning, I sat in front of my laptop staring at the mysterious folder from the anonymous USB drive that hinted at something far larger than our neighborhood scandal. I had already turned over a copy to the FBI and the state attorney's office, but I couldn't help but dig deeper myself. Inside the drive was an email thread between Karen and someone named RB Holdings. The tone of the emails was unsettling, filled with coded language about property flips, removal incentives, and board influence packages. Whoever RB Holdings was, they had sent Karen money through shell transactions and offered her scripts for public speeches that discouraged renters and newcomers. I reached out to Donna, who had now become a trusted ally. Together, we cross-referenced the RB Holdings signature with state business registrations. That's when we found the name Raymond Burke, a real estate investor with a history of shady deals. He wasn't a household name, but his network extended across 5 counties. It's tied to 6 other HOAs that had undergone hostile leadership changes over the past 4 years. In each case, property values had temporarily crashed under the weight of excessive fines and legal disputes, only to be scooped up cheaply by companies linked to Burke. What we were dealing with wasn't just HOA corruption. It was organized real estate manipulation. I immediately called Agent Monica Vickers, who had taken over the HOA-related cases after Judge Vickers recused herself from further involvement due to familial connections. Had been under quiet federal investigation for over a year. But Karen's case might finally provide the missing link they needed to take him down. Meanwhile, our own neighborhood was transforming. The HOA board now dissolved under court order. The residents had formed a temporary council, and the fear that had once silenced people had lifted. Neighbors were now sharing stories how Karen had threatened to leak someone's private adoption records, how she blackmailed a veteran over an unpermitted ramp, how she forced an elderly couple to sell their home by planting fabricated evidence of code violations. All of it built a clearer picture of a person who had been nothing less than a domestic tyrant, empowered by a corrupt system and emboldened by a distant puppeteer. Donna took it upon herself to visit the families who had been forced out and began recording their statements with the help of a retired journalist named Cynthia Reed. Cynthia had once written for the state paper and had a Rolodex full of contacts. But she'd moved to Pine Meadows for peace and never imagined she'd break another major story. But this was too big to ignore. Together, they uncovered 18 families who had been systematically harassed, evicted, or defamed under Karen's tenure. Several of them were willing to testify in court or on camera, and Cynthia's article was already being drafted for a major expose. At the same time, I received a call from a man named Alan Greer, a legal advisor who had worked pro bono in a neighboring town when they fought against HOA abuse. He'd heard about our case through community networks and offered to help us draft a new community charter that emphasized transparency, resident voting power, and anti-harassment policies. The energy in the neighborhood felt like a revolution. We were finally fighting back, not just with anger, but with structure and unity. But not everyone was thrilled. One afternoon, while I was reviewing the new draft policies, I heard a knock at my door. It was a courier delivering a handwritten letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence: "Dig deeper and you'll regret it." I showed it to Monica, who took it seriously enough to open an intimidation file. Surveillance was discreetly set up around my home, and she advised me to keep a low profile for a few days. That weekend, things escalated. Someone attempted to break into Donna's house while she was out getting groceries. The only thing taken was a file box labeled HOA Karen documents. Fortunately, Donna had already scanned everything into the cloud, as the originals were stored in a locked cabinet at Cynthia's place. But it was clear that someone, maybe Karen's allies or someone tied to Burke, was still trying to suppress the truth. Monica coordinated with the cybercrimes unit, and soon they traced a login attempt on one of the victim's email accounts to a temporary IP address that had also been used to access Burke's investment platform. That connection was enough for the DOJ to step in and issue subpoenas to Burke's company. When news of the federal involvement leaked, it created a media storm. Cynthia's expose went live the same day, and within 48 hours it had gone viral. The headline read, "From HOA to organized harassment, how a suburban tyrant triggered a federal crackdown." News vans parked outside our subdivision. National reporters called our local office. And Karen, who was now facing a pretrial hearing for additional charges, became the poster face of HOA corruption gone nuclear. Monica scheduled a press conference, where she confirmed the DOJ investigation and assured the public that every affected family would have a chance to seek restitution. But what caught everyone by surprise was Monica's announcement that federal charges against Burke were being finalized and could result in a RICO case typically reserved for organized crime. In private, she told me, "We never had this much connective evidence before. Karen's greed might have finally handed us the hammer we needed." Meanwhile, the community council was now in full operation. We elected interim officers, set up transparent banking systems, and posted all meeting agendas and minutes online. It felt like breathing fresh air after years of choking under secrecy. Donna hosted weekly town hall forums to answer questions and collect suggestions from residents. Cynthia created an anonymous tip line that uncovered more dirt, like how Karen had been funneling HOA contracts to her brother-in-law's construction company, inflating invoices and pocketing the difference. Each revelation only deepened the community's resolve. And then came the moment no one expected. During a pretrial review, Karen, under pressure from mounting evidence and with her husband now flipping on her to save himself, agreed to a partial confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the judge halted the agreement when he read her sworn statement. It failed to admit the full extent of her actions and painted her as a misunderstood leader. The judge rejected the plea and ordered the case to proceed to full trial. Karen would face everything. Her lawyer quit the same day. Watching Karen finally face accountability brought a strange mix of closure and sadness. Closure because justice was being served, but sadness because one woman's insatiable hunger for control had destroyed so many lives and eroded trust in an entire system. But in that destruction, something else was being born: a community more united, more informed, and more committed than ever. The residents of Pine Meadows were no longer afraid. We were informed, empowered, and ready to rebuild from the ashes. Yet as we moved forward, we couldn't shake the feeling that this story wasn't quite over. If Burke had managed to manipulate 6 HOAs in the past 4 years, how many others had slipped under the radar? Were there other Karens out there installed, supported and quietly enacting the same kind of community abuse? Cynthia began a statewide investigative series to find out. Donna started a nonprofit to help HOA abuse victims share their stories and access legal support. Monica requested that I join a civilian oversight committee to help develop new legislation aimed at regulating HOA boards more strictly. As for me, I accepted because I knew that if we didn't act now, someone else's neighborhood would fall next. And somewhere out there, I suspected Burke wasn't done fighting. But neither were we. The morning after Karen's failed plea deal, the neighborhood was buzzing with cautious optimism. But beneath it all lay a collective anxiety, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. While Karen's name was now synonymous with HOA corruption thanks to the viral expos, we knew the deeper network hadn't been dismantled yet. Burke still hadn't been arrested, and his shell companies were still legally active, continuing to lurk in the property records of multiple counties. Monica reassured us that federal prosecutors were finalizing the paperwork for a full-scale RICO indictment. But cases like that required time, precision, and political cover. In the meantime, Monica asked me to stay vigilant, as I had unknowingly become a linchpin in a case that stretched beyond our little neighborhood. That evening, I sat down to speak with Cynthia, who had just published a second article, this time highlighting the systemic failures that allowed Karen's behavior to flourish. It hit a nerve across the state within hours. She was flooded with emails and calls from homeowners in other neighborhoods, all sharing eerily similar stories. Falsified violations, kangaroo court-style board meetings, fines used as tools of intimidation, and in some cases, untraceable shell companies offering to buy out homes after families were driven out. Cynthia compiled everything, and soon the scale of the abuse became undeniable. By the next week, state legislators had taken notice, and a special investigative committee was announced to review HOA abuse statewide. Karen, now under house arrest, and stripped of her board position, was seething in silence. Her social media had gone dark, but Donna, ever thorough, kept tabs through mutual connections and noticed that Karen's younger sister, a paralegal from a nearby town, had suddenly started renting a property in Pine Meadows. It felt too convenient. We soon realized the house Karen's sister rented had been recently foreclosed after the original owners mysteriously received an avalanche of HOA citations over a 2-month period. The timing was more than suspicious, it was strategic.
Oh, not.
Reported it to Monica, who launched an inquiry. The lease on the property had been arranged through yet another shell company linked to Burke's network, meaning Karen may have been attempting to exert indirect influence on the community even. While under legal scrutiny, that revelation was enough for the judge to modify Karen's bail conditions. She was now barred from contacting anyone in Pine Meadows, directly or indirectly. Monica also increased surveillance and froze several of the bank accounts connected to the fake citations that had led to foreclosures. The more we uncovered, the more sinister it all seemed. What had started as a woman forging court papers to push her authority turned out to be part of a regional power grab, weaponizing HOA boards to coerce families, tank property values, and funnel distressed sales to real estate investors who profited on the chaos. It was real estate racketeering with a suburban face. Donna's nonprofit began getting requests for help from victims all over the state. She partnered with Alan Greer to build a network of legal aid, journalists, and whistleblowers who could shine light into every corner of this murky system. Meanwhile, Cynthia published a third installment, this time naming Burke directly and exposing his real estate network's connections to 6 separate HOA takeovers. Monica used the article to back her federal warrant requests, and within days, the dominoes began to fall. Burke was arrested in Arizona while trying to transfer assets to an offshore account. His properties were raided, his files seized, and his silence shattered when he realized the depth of evidence compiled against him. Facing a potential 40-year sentence, he agreed to a plea deal that involved full cooperation with federal investigators. That meant turning over every email, bank transaction, an internal memo including dozens that directly tied Karen's reign of terror in Pine Meadows to his financial planning. It turned out she had been promised a bonus for every home she could relieve of its current residents. With extra payouts for homes above a certain appraised value, she was no longer just an abusive HOA president. She was now a part of a criminal conspiracy. At the next pretrial hearing, Karen's face was pale and hollow. The prosecution presented just a fraction of the evidence they had gathered enough to ensure that no jury in the country would believe she was just a misguided community leader. The judge scheduled a full trial date, denying all further motions to dismiss or delay. Meanwhile, Pine Meadows held its first official election for a permanent community board under the new charter. For the first time in years, residents voted freely, without fear of retaliation. Donna was elected president unanimously, and I was asked to serve as ethics advisor, non-binding but influential position designed to ensure transparency and integrity in decision-making. We instituted new bylaws, including term limits, mandatory, open financial disclosures, and protections for whistleblowers. The community felt transformed, not just because the villain was gone, but because we had finally wrested power back into the hands of those who lived here, not those who sought to exploit it. But the story wasn't over. Karen's trial was scheduled for late fall, and as the date approached, media attention intensified. National outlets ran segments on the Pine Meadows case, interviewing former residents, community advocates, and even legislators, now drafting new HOA reform laws inspired by our experience. Karen's attorneys attempted one last maneuver, claiming mental instability and undue influence from Burke, but a psychological evaluation ordered by the court debunked that quickly. Karen was found to be fully competent, manipulative, and entirely aware of her actions. Her house arrest was revoked, and she was placed in a holding facility pending trial. The night before the trial began, I couldn't sleep. I walked the neighborhood, now quiet, well-lit, and welcoming, thinking about how close we had come to losing everything. It wasn't just about homes or property lines. It was about dignity, safety, and the right to live without fear of tyranny, disguised as community oversight. Karen had tried to build a kingdom of intimidation, but in the end, her own ambition had exposed the entire rotten infrastructure that supported her. The system was finally being rebuilt from the ground up. The courtroom was silent the morning Karen's trial officially began, the kind of thick silence that settles in just before a storm. The gallery was packed with community members from Pine Meadows, HOA abuse survivors from surrounding neighborhoods, and several investigative reporters who had followed the story since the day Monica handed Karen's forged court document to the judge. Karen sat at the defendant's table, shackled and wearing a bland beige prison jumpsuit, a far cry from the power blazer-clad tyrant she had once paraded around as. Her face was pale, but she still tried to project confidence, whispering to her lawyer, and scanning the room for any support. She found none. Not a single person in that courtroom had come to defend her. Monica sat in the front row of the prosecution's section, flanked by Cynthia and Donna, and next to them was me, armed with a file folder of evidence, timelines, and a journal I'd kept since this nightmare began. The prosecutor, a sharp, articulate woman named Aza Jenna Reyes, opened with a statement so direct it stunned the courtroom. She called Karen's behavior a deliberate, malicious exploitation of trust and described how she weaponized her authority to seize control, using fake violations, intimidation tactics, and ultimately forged legal documents to dismantle families. Reyes laid out the framework of the prosecution's argument: fraud, perjury, criminal conspiracy, and abuse of legal systems for personal and financial gain. She promised the jury a clear paper trail, multiple witnesses, and even digital recordings that would verify Karen's participation in the larger scheme. Orchestrated by Burke, Karen's attorney tried to paint her as a scapegoat, someone who had been misled by powerful men like Burke and had simply followed poor advice out of desperation. But the prosecution had anticipated that defense and spent the entire first week methodically demolishing it. Witness after witness took the stand. Families who had lost their homes, former board members who had been bullied or ousted. Donna, who explained how Karen manipulated elections and silenced dissent. Cynthia, who showed how each of her articles had triggered further exposure leading directly to federal intervention. Then I was called to testify. I described the day I received, the fake court order, the fear and confusion it created, and the moment Monica exposed it as a forgery. I walked the jury through Karen's aggressive behavior, her control tactics, and the exact moment she tried to leverage the legal system against me in a personal vendetta. The judge allowed me to read a portion of my journal aloud the entry. From the day I realized how deep her deception ran, I saw jurors wipe their eyes. That was when I knew we had reached them, not just with evidence, but with truth. One of the most damning witnesses came on day 8, forensic document examiner, who proved without a doubt that Karen's forged court order had been assembled from multiple unrelated legal templates, with a signature traced from a real judge's public ruling using a higher resolution scan. Then came the digital forensics expert who cracked Karen's private email server. He revealed not just correspondence with Burke, but draft templates for multiple fake legal letters, notes about whom to target next, and even spreadsheet logs tracking which families had caved under pressure. It was devastating. At one point, Reyes paused after reading a particularly vile email where Karen mocked a disabled veteran who had refused to pay a bogus violation fine. The room was silent. Even the judge looked visibly disturbed. Karen lowered her head, finally breaking eye contact with the gallery. The final nail in the coffin came when Burke himself appeared, shackled and flanked by marshals, but sworn in as a cooperating witness. His testimony was brutal. He confessed that Karen had approached him 2 years earlier with a proposal. She would create chaos, to drive families out, and he would sweep in with offers through his shell companies. He claimed she even created a points system, awarding herself imaginary bonuses based on how quickly she could evict or financially crush a household. When he explained how they laughed over email about cleansing the community, audible gasps filled the courtroom. That phrase, so dehumanizing, so vile, spread through the media like wildfire. The jury didn't need long. After closing arguments, they deliberated less than 5 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, criminal, conspiracy, abuse of process. Karen barely reacted when the foreperson read the charges. Her lawyer tried to stand, but Karen simply slumped, her shoulders finally folding under the weight of the truth. The judge, who had shown restraint throughout, did not hold back during sentencing. He called Karen a modern tyrant cloaked in bureaucracy and sentenced her to 32 years in federal prison, citing the irreparable harm she caused to vulnerable families and the long-term erosion of community trust. But perhaps the most shocking part of the day came after sentencing, when an elderly woman in the back row of the courtroom stood up and quietly handed Reyes a document. It was an affidavit, a confession from a former Pine Meadows board treasurer who had left the country 2 years earlier, now returned and ready to talk. The affidavit revealed that Karen had been quietly collecting blacklist files on residents, tracking medical histories, financial data, even children's school performance, all to determine who would be easiest to pressure. It was chilling. Monica promised to use the new testimony to ensure additional charges would be brought against any remaining collaborators. But the trial also became a symbol. By the end of the week, 3 state senators and 1 congresswoman had announced new legislation to regulate HOA powers, introduce external audits, and establish a state-level HOA ombudsman for homeowner protection. Cynthia's final article in the series was titled, "The House That Karen Built: How One Woman's Power Trip Changed the Law." In Pine Meadows, we held a community gathering on the same street where Karen once marched around with citations in hand. We celebrated. We mourned the trauma. We committed to never allowing fear to rule our homes again. That night, Donna read aloud the new community rights charter, passed by unanimous vote. The last line stuck with me: "No fence shall be Higher than our shared humanity? No gate stronger than our collective voice? But even as we celebrated, I knew the story wasn't quite finished, not yet. Asterisk. 2 weeks after the trial, life in Pine Meadows slowly began to resemble something close to normal, though normal had taken on a new meaning for many of us. The board, now restructured with Monica as interim president, held its first community forum in the clubhouse Karen had once used as her fortress of control. Where citations and fear had ruled before, now transparency and inclusion were the norm. Monica opened the meeting by acknowledging the trauma the neighborhood had endured, and promised every decision moving forward would be voted on by the community, not dictated by a single hand. Cynthia recorded the whole event and streamed it live, gathering support and encouragement from viewers all over the country who had followed the story since it broke. In the weeks since the verdict, more victims had come forward, people from neighboring HOAs who recognized Karen's tactics mirrored in their own experiences. A national conversation had begun, and it was gaining traction fast. New legislation, proposed by Senator Aldridge, who'd visited Pine Meadows days after the trial, aimed to make it illegal for any HOA to operate without external audits and homeowner representation. It was called the Homeowner Protection and Accountability Act, or the Karen Bill as the public affectionately dubbed it. But for me, recovery came in smaller, quieter moments. It's like helping Donna repaint her mailbox, now no longer the target of Karen's ridiculous violation notices. Or walking my dog through the neighborhood without wondering if a drone was watching. Or watching my daughter ride her bike down the same street Karen once used to patrol with her clipboard like a prison warden. Monica and I sat on my porch one evening, reviewing old emails and helping catalog everything into digital archives requested by the FBI. As we worked, she handed me a thick envelope, the final forensic report from Karen's seized laptop. I opened it and immediately noticed something new. A draft folder full of resignation letters addressed to herself. Each one more desperate, more paranoid, more chaotic than the last. She had known. She had known it was all collapsing, that her empire built on fear and paperwork was about to be demolished. But instead of walking away, she chose to double down. And in doing so, she exposed the very truth she had worked so hard to bury. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. In the end, Karen's downfall wasn't caused by her enemies, it was caused by her refusal to accept limits. She didn't just forge documents. She forged a fantasy world where she reigned as judge, jury, and executioner, blind to the fact that reality always catches up. The day the bulldozer arrived to remove the illegal wall Karen had erected around her house, one of her many HOA enhancements, the entire neighborhood showed up to watch. Children cheered, adults clapped, someone passed around lemonade. The wall crumbled easily, like her authority, like her lies. We planted trees where the wall had been. A small plaque now stands in the center, reading, "Here stood fear, now stands community." Cynthia's final article, published in the Sunday edition of the National Press, closed with the words, "If ever you find yourself being ruled instead of served, speak, fight, document. Because justice isn't just a courtroom. It's the voice of a neighborhood refusing to be silent." Monica was later offered a seat on the statewide homeowner reform board. Donna started a nonprofit helping homeowners sue corrupt HOAs. And me, I found peace in my own yard, in a hammock Karen once tried to have removed for violating aesthetic harmony. It's still there. I swing in it every night, looking up at the stars, remembering that tyranny doesn't start with tanks, it starts with silence. And it ends when good people decide they've had enough. We didn't just watch Karen get sentenced. We watched a system begin to heal. We watched a neighborhood take its voice back. We watched a woman who thought she was untouchable be handcuffed by the very justice she thought she controlled. And now, months later, when people hear the story of Karen's arrest, they don't just shake their heads. They share it. They tell it. Because it's not just a story about HOA abuse. It's about power and what happens when it's left unchecked. But most importantly, it's about what ordinary people can do when they stop being afraid. If you found this story gripping, if you stood up a little straighter reading what happened to us, then don't let it end here. More battles like this are happening across the country, Or Karens are hiding behind forms and fines. Let's expose them. Let's stop them. Subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel now so you never miss the truth hiding behind your own white picket fence. Because the next Karen, she might just be in your neighborhood.